Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a principal customer engineer focused on management technologies. Today's discussion is part one of a series focused on configuration profiles in Microsoft Intune, which of course is part of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Today's discussion is really an introduction just to get the series started. I call it the basics and beyond, and so we'll kick this off here. I don't know exactly how many entries in the series there will be. I'll go ahead and tell you part 5 of this series is already recorded. It's been recorded a couple of months back on certificates, right? So I jumped ahead. I knew this series was coming, went ahead and did part 5. So part 1, I'm starting now. I know part 2, 3, and 4 will be focused on individual OSs. We'll get to that more in a minute. Then we'll add some other things as we go along. So I'll detail that. Bottom line, I don't know how many will be in the series. I would anticipate maybe at minimum 9, but we'll see. Right. So let's just jump right into this, which is a very introductory session. Now, in terms of an agenda, similar to what we do in these sessions, what are configuration profiles? I'll talk through that. Why do you care about configuration profiles? We'll look at an overview of configuration profiles, talk about requirements. We'll do a brief walkthrough. I really just want to do some high-level stuff here, and we'll drill into them starting in the next session. I will wrap up with some troubleshooting tips and tricks, just kind of to get you thinking about this, right? So what are configuration profiles? Well, at the end of the day, configuration profiles are settings. They are, let me back into it this way. So I just completed a series on compliance policy, right? So that series on compliance policy, sometimes compliance policies get confused with configuration profiles. They are very different things. Compliance policies, as a general rule, are about assessing whether a device is in compliance with the configured requirements. As a general rule, compliance policy is not about actually configuring anything, right? Configuration profiles, on the other hand, is where you do a ton of configuration. Now that configuration could be settings that you will go into an area and identify and turn those on. Things like turning off the camera or requiring a password or not allowing cellular data or different things, right? They could be configurations. So under configuration profiles, you'll find things like being able to whitelist applications and things like that, right? It could be options where you need to choose for a setting one of many potential options, right? So there's a huge conglomeration of things here in configuration profiles, as you'll see, that you can set. Now, the question, why do you care about configuration profiles? Well, the first thing I'm going to say is that, well, I'll say it under Azure AD. So for Azure AD, you care about configuration profiles. On the Windows side, when you're joining Azure AD, making the decision how your device, Windows device, is going to live in Azure AD. Now, let me explain that a minute. So a lot of the discussion that I know I've had with customers is how do you want your Windows device to communicate with Azure AD? Is it going to be a scenario where that device is directly joined to Azure AD and not at all joined to on-prem AD? Or is it going to be a configuration where the device is hybrid joined to Azure AD, meaning it's actually joined to on-prem AD and registered in Azure AD? And this is a big, big topic that we could spend a lot of time on, but I'm going to boil it down to say it this way, right? This is a pivotal decision. So on the Windows side, this is true of iOS and Android as well, part of what I'm going to say. But on the Windows side, organizations across the planet are accustomed to delivering configuration settings for those devices through Active Directory group policy, right? That's fine. But in the modern world where we are today, where devices are not necessarily on-prem, think back, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, we used to have devices that were plugged in to the Ethernet on the corporate campus. It made a great deal of sense to control those devices with group policy settings, right, and other choices. Today's world that we live in, more and more and more, we're moving to a situation where devices may not come on-prem at all. They may not VPN into the corporate network for days, right? They may be supposed to do that, but they may not do that because they don't need to do that, right? Some places you can get email without being connected to the corporate network. That's kind of a standard, it seems like, these days. And other things that don't necessarily require you to join through VPN. Well, so if you're still in a world where you're delivering configurations through Active Directory GPO, you're going to get into a bind if you have an emergency push that you need to push out to machines, because machines may not VPN into your corporate network for a while, right? And so that's why this is really a pivotal discussion. A lot of organizations are going with hybrid Azure AD join for the sole reason, or a key reason, is to be able to still use Active Directory GPO policies, right? AD policies are great, right? Let's keep them around as long as we need to. But here's the point: you can either make the decision to go directly to Azure AD direct join, or you can take it in 2 steps, which I think actually will end up being more work. Hybrid Azure AD join, which will then at some point turn into a Azure AD join only. Here's the point of this entire discussion, right? For those organizations that want to go with Azure AD join only, one of the big pieces of they try to grapple with is how do they get the settings out of GPO and translate it into another mechanism for deploying. Well, this whole thing we're talking about, configuration profiles, is the answer to that. So many, I want to say all, I'm sure it's not all, right? But the vast majority of things that you would consider configuring with Active Directory GPO will be configured through configuration profiles, right? I would even go so far as to say there is nothing that you may need to configure through group policy that you cannot find an equivalent in configuration profiles. Now, there may be a couple of different twists and turns you might need to take in some cases, but the vast majority of things that you need are there. You're gonna see that, right? Okay, and then the other point, so I've talked a lot about Azure AD joining. That applies to Windows devices only. If you're managing iOS, Android, those truly do not join Azure AD. They are registered in Azure AD. All of this from an MDM perspective, an Intune perspective, doesn't matter at all. The device, iOS, Android, Windows, Mac, makes no difference. You can manage it in similar ways with configuration profiles. So that's a long discussion on Azure AD, but just wanted to make sure we had that discussion, right? The configurations here in the configuration profiles section, jumped ahead. In the configuration profiles section are very, very robust, right? Already talked about some of it. This section of, if you look at all of Intune and the capabilities that are in Intune, I would hazard to say that the configuration profile umbrella is the most important umbrella that you will need to grapple with. And that's alongside some pretty important things like being able to deploy applications, being able to manage software updates and Windows 10 versioning and different things, right? Those are important, but this is the heart and soul of being able to do what you might want to do on these devices, right? And then it's focused. So what I mean by that is these configurations will be configured, if you will, by platform. And then once you decide the platform, by configuration. So let me give you one example, which I'll mention again probably a little bit. People have asked sometimes, hey, I want to create a setting, maybe a certificate deployment setting that I want to go to all of my devices, Windows, iOS, Android, all of them. Can I configure that one time and associate it with all of the platforms? And the answer is no, you can't. You have to configure it by platform. And there's reasons for that. One of them is that sometimes you'll find that there's a little bit of difference from one platform and the capabilities to another. And so you need to have that specificity, right? So when you're in the console, you are very focused on what you're doing. Here's another way, right? Say that you have administrators in your organization that are Windows focused, and all they need to do is work on the Windows settings. Well, you can configure a scenario through role-based access control where all they see are the Windows configurations. And then the iOS and Android administrators might never see the Windows settings, but they will see the iOS and Android settings, right? So that's another example of what I mean when I say that configuration profiles are very focused, right? Now, you saw this slide a second ago, sorry. But in terms of an overview of these configuration profiles, so I'm not going to read these to you. The point of the next 3 slides is to show you that there are a lot of different options and twists and turns and places that you can configure things in configuration profiles. So I mentioned earlier too that we're gonna spend the next 3 sessions kind of focused on the individual platforms at still a high level, but we're going to talk about some general settings and see how they work and different things like that. We will also focus on some of these that are really important and key discussion points that might be of interest. One such would be, I believe I haven't done it yet, but I'll say it here, so hopefully I won't forget, administrative templates. That's a big one. Right? It's not a hard one, but it's a big one for Windows. Custom deployments, right? That one's a big one too, and we'll talk about that one. I'm not exactly sure when yet, but one of the things I'll say about it here. Intune is robust, it's full-featured, it has all sorts of configuration options, so many, in fact, that you may never have to do anything with Intune other than what you see in the UI. Right, but there are some scenarios. This example that I'm about to give you is a dated example, right? It's probably at this stage 2, maybe 3 years old, maybe, right? But back in the day, I talked with a customer who was looking to be able to configure Bluetooth and some Bluetooth settings, and was in the Intune console at the time, and could not find any place to configure Bluetooth. So we were talking and said, well, if Intune can't configure Bluetooth, maybe I have to go look at another product. I'm like, no, hang on, right? Just because you may not see something in the UI, and this applies to Windows, iOS, and Android as well, Microsoft, Apple, and Google. Just because you don't see something in the UI does not necessarily mean that that configuration is not supported. Right? There's always this tension between what the OS manufacturer puts into the capabilities of MDM versus what the MDM management provider is able to put into their UI, right? So in the case of the Bluetooth, we were able to go to, this is getting a bit off in the weeds, but all of the capabilities of MDM are listed in a document that lists all of the configuration service providers for that OS platform. Bluetooth was in there. And so we absolutely could manage Bluetooth without a problem. It's just that the setting that the customer wanted to manage was a bit obscure, and the Intune team had not built it into the UI yet. Now it's there, right? But the point is, you may find something that either isn't present that you need, or frankly, you may want to configure something through a custom channel. For some reason, you prefer to do it that way, right? So that custom option is there to be able to fill that gap if you need it, right? There's other things here, such as looking at device features, right, that we might look at. Other things here. So email, being able to configure email, looking at kiosk mode is a big one. Certificates, talked about. I've already got one out there, on that. But kind of akin to certificates is Wi-Fi, VPN, right? One I did not put here, but I do intend to cover as a part of the series is Microsoft Tunnel, right? Which is an interesting way to deal with things. Shared multi-user devices. That's a Windows thing. We'll see what all of these, we work in. But the point of this is it is a huge area with many configurations, right? Okay, so in terms of requirements, so of course Intune is a requirement, Azure AD is a requirement for your devices, and you do need to have a supported platform, and the device that you're working with needs to be enrolled, right? Now let me pull back on that one for a minute. So one of the concepts that we've already talked about in the application series is being able to manage applications on the device without that device being enrolled, right? That's truly possible. It really depends on your scenario. But if you want to manage aspects of the device itself, things like camera, things like the Wi-Fi channel, things like built into the device, the experience on the device, the screen, things like that, right? Then the device does need to be enrolled. So in one case, you can manage the settings in the app without enrollment because the apps are built that way on iOS and Android. Certain apps are built that way, I should say. Enlightened apps are built that way. Whereas the device itself can remain unmanaged. If you want the full management experience, then you do need to enroll the device, right? Okay, so enough about that. And let's jump into just very high level, very high level, some details about this configuration profile section. So I'm going to pull in the Intune console here. Sorry, the Endpoint Manager console here for a second. I got a connection error there. Let's see if in fact it's going to work right for me now. Nope, can't reach the page. Let me make sure my Wi-Fi is good. Okay, much better. So for some reason, my Wi-Fi went to sleep, but we're back, so no problem. So this is the main page of Endpoint Manager. And if I want to get to my configuration profile section, really easy, I'm just going to blow out to the right and click on devices. Now that I'm on devices, I can scroll down and I can see that there is a section for configuration profiles. So I can go into configuration profiles and I can add profiles here, no problem. You see I have one, I can create a profile. But here's an interesting thing. If I go directly to configuration profiles, I'm going to have to first choose what platform I want to manage, right? Well, think about that scenario I mentioned a bit ago where you may have Windows-focused admins and you may have iOS-focused admins or Android-focused admins. You may not want them to have to choose, and it may be a little bit more confusing for them to have to choose. So what you could do instead of this is you could actually go directly, let me close this, go directly to the platform. Sorry, go back to the overview. Go directly to the platform. Maybe I'm going to choose iOS, right? And so if I look down to iOS, I'm going to have configuration profiles here like I did. I can go create configuration profile, but now whenever I do the drop down for the platform, there's only one choice because I'm focused specifically on iOS, right? Same thing that I could do for Windows, right? So if I go to configuration profiles for Windows and create a profile, now I have a couple of choices of Windows devices because I have both Windows 10 and Windows 8.1 to some degree that I can support, right? And if I go to Android, I would see the same thing, right? So that would help you focus. Remember that thing that I told you that we really can do with Intune? We can focus on the configurations that we care about and hopefully not have any confusion about what we're configuring or cross-pollination between platforms and that kind of thing. Now, while I'm here, I do want to show you a view very quickly, no detail at all, of the kinds of things that you might want to do. So on the Windows side, since I'm in Windows, I'm going to go create a profile, right? Create profile, and then I'm going to choose Windows 10 and later. Now, if you think back to compliance policy, all I had to do was choose the platform that I wanted to configure, and that was it, because there were not very many settings under compliance policy. Here, under configuration profiles, now I have to choose the specific profile type that I want. And there are a bunch of them, right? Now, if I choose to go into one, let me just do administrative templates. This is a Windows thing. If I choose administrative templates, I'll take you through a little bit. I'll just give this a name real quick, right? And then scroll down and we will continue. And then under this section alone, I have lots and lots of configurations that I can do. See, I have computer configuration and all of these choices, underneath. I have user configuration, right? And these choices. I have all settings where I can see them all, right? There's a bunch of things under here. And we'll talk about this a little bit later in another session, right? But go back to Windows and configuration profiles. Other things that are in here that I might want. So Windows 10 again, right? And now other things like device there's custom as you see, but device restrictions, right? There's a whole bunch here again. I'm going to go to device restrictions here, right? And so this is where you would find things that you would expect to find, like being able to control different aspects of the device in a specific way, right? But just look at these options. Look at all these. Under this one category, all of these options are here, right? Being able to control edge, being able to deal with the network proxy, password settings, privacy, projection ability, all of these. Now, if I expand one of these, look at the various options underneath. There's a bunch of options underneath when I expand. So that's power settings, but there's a bunch of things there, right? If I go to Defender Smart Screen, there's a bunch of things there, right? If I go up to control panel and settings, there's a number of things here as well, right? So hopefully you're getting the feel. There's a lot of stuff in this section. That's why I mentioned it is probably the biggest umbrella of all of settings and different things in Intune. Now, let me just show you iOS while I'm demonstrating, and that will be about all that we're going to do for this session as far as demos. But let me go to iOS. And so here on iOS, if I go ahead and configuration profiles, create a profile, select a platform, iOS. So under iOS, you're not going to see the same things here that you saw for Windows because not everything applies to every platform, but you will see some similar things, right? And then if we go up to device restrictions like I was at a moment ago and create that and so on, we'll see a lot of things that are similar, but a number of things that are different. And even within a category that might look similar, then you're going to have some differences based on the type of device that you're looking at, right? And so here's some general things that you might want, right? Different so on, right? So same kind of deal, lots and lots of settings under this. Now, let me also show you for a minute some different detail about this while we're here, right? Let me go over back to devices, back to iOS, and then back to configuration profiles. So this here, let me actually, I want to show it here. Let's see. Yeah, I will. So this is actually edging a little bit toward the troubleshooting discussion. In fact, I'll just go ahead and have it here because it's coming up next anyway, right? Let me just share with you, there's a lot of things that we can do to troubleshoot things that go wrong on devices, right? For example, on Windows, if we really need to dig deeply, we have the event logs, we have the registry settings, we have some other things we can tap into. On iOS and Android, we have the ability to, on the Apple side, use Apple Configurator, or on the Android side, forget what it's called, but be able to tap directly into the device to see configurations that are coming down. Generally speaking, you don't need to do that, right? We give you enough in Intune to be able to see in a very robust way what's going on, right? So let me, I think it's Windows where this is configured. Let me just show you an existing configuration profile that I have. This isn't doing anything, right? I think it might have some data, but it's been a long time since I've touched it. But basically, so whenever we look to configure or to troubleshoot, there's two real places in Intune that Okay, there's a third, but they kind of tie together. There's two main places I think of to troubleshoot in Intune. The first is here, right? If I go into the configuration, then I can review the configuration, but more than that, if I scroll down under Monitor, I can see the status for a specific device as it comes back. Well, in this case, I don't have any status for this device, so no big deal, but I would see if I had a device targeted, I would see here the device and whether in fact it was deployed successfully or not or whatever, right? Under user status, I don't have any users targeted by this. So not a surprise, I don't see anything here either. But then I also have my per setting status, where if you saw that in certain sections, I have multiple settings that I can configure. This would show me for each setting whether it was implemented correctly, whether it had a problem, maybe some things worked, some things didn't. I think I actually have one in here that has some detail. Let me look real quick, one moment while I take a quick peek again. Configuration profiles. No, I thought I did. Let me look at Android, and if I don't, then I don't, but that's, trust me, we'll definitely get into this as we go along. Do I have anything for Android configuration profiles? No. So anyway, that's enough of that. So that's one section. You can actually look at the specific configuration, look at the device it's targeted to, the user it's targeted to, the settings that you've configured, and see what comes back. Right? Now another is the troubleshooting blade, right? Troubleshooting and support. So the first thing I have to do is select a user that is associated with the device, right? You may not be targeting your configuration to a user, and that's okay, but you at least want to use the user to help focus and look at the device that you're trying to troubleshoot. So in my case, I just have one user, and so I'm going to put my user in. Come on. That should be enough, good enough, and I'm going to select. And then this is going to show me all of the devices associated with this particular user. Now I can come in here and I can look at different configuration profiles and so on just to make sure that they are targeted to the right place, to the user in this case. Now you see I don't have any, that's why I don't have any detail when I look at that single configuration profile that I have. But certainly I can look down, I can see all the devices where that user has been associated. So I want to pick this one, maybe. So I'm going to pick this device, and when I do, on the left-hand side, I get a list of different things that I can look at, right? So device configuration would be one. And so here I might see, so these are different configurations that I actually have deployed. They are not part of configuration profiles, but they are deployed. So I could go look at it if I wanted to, and see details, right? So you might even see the different details of what happens. So this is a really, really nice place to be able to go and troubleshoot. And in some of these, I'm sorry I don't have one here, but again, you'll see it in future sessions. You'll see workflows where, okay, the device was targeted, okay, it arrived, okay, success or failure or whatever else right here. Now, another piece that has gotten better over time is reports. So you can go look at device compliance. That's not this section at all. You know, you can look at different things in the data warehouse, log analytics, right? These are not really related to what we're talking about right now. The reason I point them out is because this section will become more relevant and more relevant and more relevant. There's a lot of good stuff here right now, right? But for compliance profiles, the first one that I showed you specifically on the configuration, then secondly on the troubleshooting section, those are where we need to go look, right? So again, very, very quick, high-level walkthrough, told you it would be, and that's all we're going to do for now. All right, so turning our attention to troubleshooting tips and tricks. So I've already talked to you about troubleshooting and the specific detail that you can get for an individual profile, the detail you can get on the troubleshooting node, right? Now, in terms of tips and tricks, the first one I want to talk to you about is device check-in, right? Actually, this one's interesting because at some point I'm going to do a session, on this to really illustrate how it works. But for now, let me just talk about it. So in order for devices to be able to get configuration, then they need to check in, right? And learn about that configuration from the Intune service. So how does the check-in work? For those of you who are coming from or accustomed to configuration manager clients will initiate a check-in once an hour, right? And that's how it works. You can change that, whatever, but it's once an hour. That's not true for Intune managed devices. Any device managed, I forget the exact cadence, they're very similar, but about after enrollment, days after enrollment, while you've been running the device for a while, the device will check in for new configurations about every 8 hours-ish. There is variance per device, right? But on average, about every 8 hours-ish, right? Not the 1 hour that you're accustomed to with Configuration Manager. So here's the question that sometimes comes up. Are you saying that once I do a configuration, I have to wait up to 8 hours for the device to check in to get it before it applies? And the answer is absolutely not, right? The 8 hour-ish time frame on the device is but one mechanism by which the device can be caused to check in, right? The way it normally works, in fact, if you've done any testing with Intune, whether it's managing Windows, Apple, or Google devices, doesn't matter. If you do a configuration and you deploy it, assign it to a group, then you're watching a device, very likely you're going to see that device pick up that configuration setting and implement it within minutes, right? Within minutes. So all of your devices aren't just happening to check in within minutes. So how does that work? The way it works is that every OS platform has their version of what's called a notification service. In the Microsoft world, that's called the Windows notification service. In Apple world, that's the Apple notification service. In Google, I believe it's the Google Play configuration. I think I haven't messed a lot with Google with that, but we'll do that whenever we do this session. So effectively, whenever you do a configuration in Intune and hit OK on the assignment, if that is a required assignment, then Intune says, oh, wait, this is required. So I know that this particular thing is targeted to Windows devices. So what I'm going to do right now, I know that it's these 20 Windows devices that need to be receiving this configuration. I'm going to go out to our Windows notification services that maintain a constant connection to these managed devices for Intune purposes and other purposes. And I'm going to tell the Windows notification service, hey, go kick these devices and tell them to check in right now because there's a configuration waiting for them. And so as soon as you hit OK, we're going to the Windows notification service. We tell the Windows notification service these 20 devices. Windows notification service attempts to contact those 20 devices to say, hey, new configuration, check in. Those devices check in, they immediately get the configuration, and that's why you see it happen in a matter of minutes on the devices typically. Now, what might prevent that? And by the way, the same is true for Apple devices as well. If we're targeting Apple devices, we realize that Intune goes and tells the Apple or the Google notification service, hey, go tell these devices to check in right away, right? That's why it works that way. So what happens if you don't see them? Well, so in order for this to work, the device has to have a healthy connection to the notification service. In the Windows world, that's really easy to see. It's in the registry, and it's a URL that changes every now and then just to keep it fresh. And you can see whether it's had errors the last time it tried to connect, whether it's healthy, whether it's not. Again, when I do this session at some point, I will show this to you, right? But that's how it works. Now, the 8 hours then becomes kind of a fail-safe just to make sure. Maybe the device was offline when the notification was attempted to the device, so it didn't actually get the notification. So now it's going to check in, probably when it's turned back on, if it was off, because it likely is past the last time it did the check-in, so it'll do one right away. or if it was on and just not connected to the internet, on its cycle, it'll go through and do its thing, right? So there's a lot of things. Now, there's other choices too. If you're an Intune admin, you can go into the Intune console and trigger a check-in right away. No problem. It does use the Windows notification service, just like described. Or if you're a user on the device, you should be able to go do a check-in manually at any point, right? So a lot of different options, and just wanted to slow down for a minute and talk through that. And again, I'm planning to do a session, on that. There could be situations still in the tips and tricks where you have a conflict. In fact, you saw whenever I was trying to do a quick troubleshooting demo, it wasn't configuration profile, but you saw that Intune detected conflicts on one of my configurations. Could be that you find that as well, right, in some situations. So if you have a conflict, or overlapping settings, then the setting that is most restrictive is going to win. Now, this next one is really important. Sorry, I keep doing that. My bad. This next one is really important, and that is, how do you name your particular configurations? We have compliance policy, we have configuration profiles, we have Windows configuration profiles, user targeted, device targeted, iOS, Android, all these things. So basically, whenever you come up with before you start doing this, you really need to come up with a naming standard so that you can clearly delineate compliance policy, configuration policy, make sure that people know that they're looking at one versus the other. Consider creating your profiles by a specific task and naming it accordingly. Create profiles that apply to specific groups of devices, of users, whatever. Make sure that you have separate user policies and user profiles and device profiles. See, I did that. For so long, I used to call it configuration policies. It's not. It's configuration profiles and compliance policies, but I just mixed the two up. So it still happens from time to time. Configure a single profile that applies to a given platform. That's what I told you at the beginning of this, that I told you I would say again. You can't configure one configuration that applies to all the platforms. It has to be, platform specific. So that's what I wanted to do in this introductory session today. We will add more sessions. Part 2, 3, and 4, as I mentioned, I know will be Windows, iOS, and Android. And then we'll get a little bit more specific after that. 2, 3, 4 will still be introductory level. And you'll see some things happen in those sessions, but we'll do the detailed stuff, kiosk mode, and everything after that. But for now, we'll go ahead and wrap this session up, and we will see you next time.